We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was recorded, the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
Today, we're 127 miles off the coast of Scotland, in the middle of one of the most dangerous seas in the world. Despite the deadly storms, heavy fog and tangled currents, it's the planet's busiest body of water, home to hundreds of oil rigs. For weeks at a time, Chris Lemons lives here in a caravan-sized, pressurised steel chamber, crushed in with 5 other people. He only leaves to go diving. It's his job to head down almost 100 metres into the pitch-black, icy water and patrol the dark seabed repairing oil rigs. Down here, it's more like being in outer space than on Earth. Right now, the only thing keeping Chris alive is a 30-metre long umbilical cord attached to his dive suit. It supplies his air, light, keeps him warm and lets him communicate with the rest of his crew. But on this day in September 2012, that cord snaps. It's 2 a.m, 300 feet beneath the North Sea, and Chris is stranded in total darkness. No air, no heat, no light. He is completely alone. I'm at Middleton, and this is Head Game. Today, the most remarkable story of survival from one of the world's most dangerous jobs. Chris Lemons, listen, thank you ever so much for coming on my podcast, Head Game. Quite a story that we have with yourself. Now, I'm an ex-Special Forces operator and there's not much that scares me, but claustrophobia, oh, God, it's one of those things that I dread. When I read your story, and having watched Last Breath as well, the Netflix documentary that you've done, it gives me nothing but anxiety, and I'm not scared to say that, mate. Saturation diving, it is a unique career. It's a unique trade. For those of us, including myself, that are completely new to this trade, talk me through what a typical day as a saturation diver looks like.
Yeah, I mean, saturation diving is really, it is basically deep sea diving, which that definitely does make it sound more glamorous than it is. But in essence, it's just a mechanism really to allow us to dive very deep, almost universally in the oil and gas industry. As I'm sure you know, when you go diving, you pay a penalty in terms of the inert gases being saturated in your tissue. So when you breathe air, that means the nitrogen, there's a nitrogen build up as you go down, and the deeper you go and the longer you spend, the more time you have to spend doing decompression. So decompression stops on the way back, if you like, to the surface to safely allow those gases to exit your tissues without blocking, veins and arteries and things like that with gas bubbles. So, if you're going to dive to 30 meters for 40 minutes or something, you might need to stop for 10 minutes on the way back up. But if you want to go down to 100 meters, for example, and stay down there for 6 hours a day, which is what we do, we spend 6 hours on a seabed, that equivalent decompression will take something like 5 days. So obviously you can't do that on a daily basis. And really saturation diving is designed to avoid that. So what you're doing is living essentially under pressure. So on the vessel on which I work, the divers live in saturation chambers. So they're just metal cylinders really. And on day one, you go in, we shut the door. We work in teams of 3. There's usually 4 teams of 3, so 12 divers all to cover a 6-hour shift on the seabed. And that system is pressurized down basically to what we call an equivalent working depth. So if we're going to be working at 100 meters, they'll pump gas into those chambers to give you the equivalent of about 90 meters of pressure inside. And then basically you live under that pressure. So you eat, you sleep, you read your books, you get your washing done in those chambers, which is very much, when you talk about the claustrophobia of diving, it's definitely, it is a problem for you, then it's not so much the diving that's the issue, it's the living in the close confines of those chambers, and particularly with people you might not get on very well with as well.
Listen, I'm used to living under pressure. I am used to living under pressure, as you know from my background, but you live under a different type of pressure. Can you explain that? You explained it slightly with the chambers, but there's pressure and then there's saturation diving pressure. Is it really like living in a tin can? And how long are you in these sort of tin cans for?
Yeah, it's a very accurate description. It is entirely like living in a tin can. It's a prison, basically. They vary, but the ones on my boat, for example, are just under 2 meters high. So I'm about that high, and so I bang my head everywhere I go. And you're in very, very close confines. You're living, a few inches, sleeping a few inches away from some sort of 6 others. So yeah, it's a very funny place to live in it, but it's also a psychological pressure, if you like. Yeah, absolutely right. 90 meters of pressure is absolutely enormous. It's a bomb, really, you're living in, I guess. But it's also a psychological pressure, because when you shut that door on day one, that sort of 5 days of decompression I'm talking about can't be circumnavigated. That's if your mother dies, or if your appendix bursts, or you break a leg or whatever, you still have to go through those 5 days of decompression. So you need to be someone who can deal with that psychologically, I guess. And just living in, as I said, in close confines, and lacking any kind of privacy. You're on camera 24 hours a day, just to supposedly to monitor your well-being. And there's no real escape. It's like a prison, really, without the exercise yard. So the only real relief is the bit where you go diving every day, and that involves basically locking a diving bell onto the top of that chamber system, and we climb up as a team of 3, and we're basically lowered down through a hole in the bottom of the vessel down to that equivalent depth. So if we're stored, as we call it, in the chambers at 90 meters, and you lower the diving bell down to 90 meters under the boat, when we then open the door of the diving bell, because you've got an equivalence of pressure inside and out, then the water doesn't come in. So you've got sort of a dry environment from which to dive, and then you drop down the last few meters to the seabed. You work for 6 hours, then you come back into the diving bell, and you're hoisted back up to the ship, locked back onto the chamber, and you climb back down. And what that really means is, during that whole process, you're never decompressing. You're always under pressure. And as you said, wow. So we're in there for 28 days. At least that's the legal maximum in the UK at the moment. So you spend basically just short of a month doing that every day. And then towards the end, the last 3 or 4 days, we would stop diving. And then you just sit in the chamber, basically, while they very gradually let that gas out, and you decompress in the safety and the dry environment of the chamber. So yeah, it's a funny way of life, and a very convoluted way of doing something fairly simple, to be honest.
Yeah, you talk about the psychological pressures, and hence why my podcast is called Head Game. 1, keeping yourself calm. 2, having complete trust in your equipment and your team. How easy or how hard is it to combine all of those? The equipment, the team, you have to trust the process. That's a head game in itself, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's, for me, that was always the toughest bit of the job, and you're absolutely right in that trust plays an enormous part. We're a team of 3 on the seabed, but you've got nearly 100 people on that boat, and people ashore as well supporting us, really, just to facilitate that. So it's a work where you play a part in your own safety, but you are massively dependent, exactly right, on the life support systems, the processes, other people's professionalism, integrity. So yeah, the people you work with and the equipment you use is a massive factor. So you learn to trust, as I'm sure, it's anything can become normal kind of after a while, or normalizes a little bit at least. And, doing things repetitively for many years, you sort of begin to genuinely trust the sort of the people and the equipment around you. But that never goes away. I think there's always that lingering doubt that if something, it feels very safe to be on a daily basis, I guess, but you do know in the back of your mind that if something does go wrong, you're in a place where it's going to be, it's going to be exacerbated hugely, and you could very quickly be in a dangerous position. But a weird way, people talk about scuba diving, and I see scuba diving strangely as a more dangerous thing than what I do, purely because ours is so regulated, so controlled, and we do have these enormous teams of people in which you trust, whose living it is to make sure this is all safe and good. But yeah, you definitely have to psychologically, as you say. I think you block a lot of stuff out, don't you? I mean, I don't say that lightly. I think your sort of brain can normalize a lot of things, when you do them regularly, and maybe you just don't think about the worst case scenarios too much.
Yeah, I get that. 100% get that. And so, how do you prepare your mindset for that? Your training can only prepare you to a certain level. How do you prepare yourself mentally to leave your loved ones and your family to go into that environment?
I think a lot of the psychological preparation involves practical preparation, really. So for me, certainly through experience, you learn that you really need to box a lot of stuff off before you go in. So you need to be in as good a place as you can with your family and your loved ones. You need to make sure that your practical life, your bills are ready to be paid and things like that, just to try and eliminate as many of the stresses as you can, in the outside world, if you like. I think if I go in with a clear mind and I'm happy with everything outside, which is very, very rarely possible, to be honest, but you try your best to square as much of your personal life, if you like, away before you go in. And yeah, I think a lot of it is about getting a mindset where you're looking forward to it, or try and convince yourself that you're looking forward to elements of it, and really focus as well, on the task in hand, on the job. That I find, if I'm really thinking hard about the work that we're doing every day, that sort of alleviates the stress a bit. But yeah, fundamentally just being really well prepared, I think, which I'm sure has similarities in your X line of work.
Yeah, I suppose that's the head game, right? You mentioned about making sure the bills are paid. You don't think about that. Those things, the small sort of personal admin type things, making sure the bills are paid, making sure that you've got the money in the bank for the rent or for the mortgage, making sure that the family's got enough to support themselves because you're not coming back for a month no matter what. I suppose all of that plays a role. Just talk me through, getting into that chamber and going down. Do you all go down at the same time, or do you all stay in different chambers? Because you go down to 300 feet, right, to ultimately fix oil rigs. But just talk me through. So 3 of you are in the top chamber and you go down, and how does that work? How do you work as a team in the chamber? I know there's a huge team on top in the boat, but how do you work as a team in the chamber?
Yeah, so it does vary slightly from boat to boat, but as a general rule, you'll find there are 12 divers in the chambers. Some boats have systems where you might be sort of 3 to a chamber. On the boat I'm on at the moment, for example, there's 2 chambers with 6 people. So each of those teams of 3 is covering a 6-hour period on the seabed. So you all work a slightly different shift pattern. So yeah, it's routine, I would say, is the mantra. It's very, very much you do the same thing at the same time every day. You get up, you have your breakfast, and you're mindful of others. And there might be 6 hours of the day where you've got to pretty much live in silence whilst they sleep, that kind of thing. And yeah, we have a routine where we, as a team of 3, every day we have a slightly different job, which we rotate. So one day you'll be what we call diver 1, one day you'll be diver 2, and one day you'll be the bellman. So when we actually go down to work on the seabed, one of us will always stay, the bellman will always stay within the bell, and just 2 of us go down to work on the seabed every day. So that's a role that changes every day, and your job's on the bottom when you're working, but also the sort of the roles we play in the chamber in terms of, somebody cleans the shower every day, somebody, you might get a tea in every day. Silly things like that are totally dictated by routine and what you're doing every day. So yeah, it becomes very organized. I find strangely that people talk about the longevity of diving physically. I don't think it ever does you any damage. I've got lots of colleagues well into their 60s, but what I do say is most of them who are still doing it at that age are slightly institutionalized by that routine, and find it quite hard to deviate, or when somebody else deviates from it.
We mentioned, it's great to go down, and it can be glorified, and it's great to go down at those depths. And what do you see? What do you experience? It takes a certain mindset. Talk to me about working on that seabed. You're down there on the seabed. what have you got in your hands? What are you repairing? What does your job entail on the seabed? Because that's brutal in itself, because you've got a job to do, hence why you're going through this whole sort of transition of being pressurized in a chamber in order to get down to 300 feet, whatever it may be, the North Sea, to repair oil rigs. What does that look like down on the seabed?
So it can be a massively varied job. There can be days when you're doing pretty technical work. You can be replacing sections of pipeline. You can be working on hydraulic infrastructure. There are days when you can be lugging sandbags for 6 hours from one place to another. There are days when you can be sat watching a gauge for 6 hours. So it's there's days when it's great and you feel like a spaceman, and we're weighted to be negative because we work on a seabed. I wear a pair of wellies most days at work. I don't wear fins because I'm walking around. And you're jumping around on a big climbing frame, and it could be those days could be half decent, but there are also days, as I said, where it is complete drudgery and you're just doing manual labor really for 6 hours. So yeah, it's good. So we're either putting that kind of stuff in, we're installing it, we can be inspecting it, we can be repairing it, maintaining it. And increasingly these days, particularly in the southern part of the North Sea, we're taking a lot of that out, doing a lot more decommissioning and cleaning it out.
Talk to me, Chris, about your superhero suit. What's it look like when you're in your swimsuit? People might envision a big bobble head with air being compressed into it, in a sort of spacesuit under the water. So just talk me through the equipment, and I talk about trusting the equipment. Is it ultimately a swimsuit? What does the mask look like? How do you get your air into it? Talk to me when you're at the bottom doing all these repairs. How do you look? I've got this superhero image in my head, or is it less glamorous?
Yeah, I think you know very well it's going to be less glamorous than that. Yeah, it's just a speedos and a knife between my teeth, and I head down and
that's
do my
the
best,
SBS.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's a mix of all of it really. It's so we do wear that vision you have maybe of an oldie worldy diver with a big old helmet, big brass helmet. The technology hasn't actually on that level moved on that much. So we do wear a sort of a big bobble helmet, but it's made of Kevlar these days and it's pretty lightweight. But the wetsuit, so when you're diving shallow, you might wear a dry suit to keep you warm, but we wear a pretty primitive, loose fitting wetsuit, but it has an infrastructure of, it's almost like, I was equate it to a garden irrigation system, just little hoses with holes in, and we pump hot water down from the ship. Everything to us is supplied by an umbilical, so it's we have an umbilical which goes down to the diving bell, which gives you breathing gas, gives you electricity power for a light and a camera on the top of your helmet. Also brings you hot water down to pump around that suit. So, and that just floods out the ends. It's just it's almost like being in a jacuzzi. Really, it's quite pleasant. Being too warm is usually the problem. Yeah, then it's a big old pair of yellow fishing wellies, a big harness. You usually have a bag of crap hanging off you in terms of tools and spanners and whatever other gubbins you're taking down with you. And then we also have what we call a bailout. So we carry 2 standard sort of scuba cylinders on our back, as well as an emergency breathing supply should we have any issues with our primary supplies, which come from the vessel. Yeah, so it's your cumbersome. The helmet weighs about 20 kilos. All of it feels horrible before you get in the water, hot and uncomfortable, and it's all pretty neutral in the water. So once you get in, it's a significant improvement. But yeah, there's nothing glamorous or graceful or elegant about any of it. You drop down out of the diving bell to the seabed like a bag of shit most days, to be honest, and just get on with it. Really, you're not streamlined, put it that way.
Listen, I know the feeling when it comes to parachuting. You've got your Bergen, your rucksack between your legs. You've got all your parachute kit on. You got your helmet on. You can't really move. You're shuffling towards the back end of the door, and all you can't wait to do actually is jump out of the aircraft because you just want all that weight sort of relieved from you, so you can almost just glide there under your canopy. I suppose it's similar, and when you said it sort of hit a nerve. You've got all this cumbersome kit on. It's heavy. You're sweating, and I suppose you just can't wait to get into the water because it just takes all the pressure off. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on, accurate description. Yeah, the sort of the 5 minutes before you get in are the worst bit of the day when you're absolutely hot, sweaty, everything's awkward, you're clashing it. You just want to get in and cool down and be a bit weightless. Yeah, absolutely right.
So you have to put full faith, Chris, into your team that's pumping this air, that's pumping this water, that's keeping the oxygen flowing through this umbilical cord, and also complete trust in your equipment. How hard is that to actually maintain? And is there ever moments where you think, oh God, this doesn't feel right, something could go wrong?
Yeah, it's a lot of it's dependent on where you're working. I've found over the years we've kept a lot of the equipment. As I said, when I say it hasn't progressed much since the days of the big brass helmets, the reason for that is because we keep a lot of it pretty simple. We've moved on to using rebreathers quite a lot recently, which give you a lot more emergency supply of gas. But for me, it's a difficult one. That's a big step for us in terms of they're massively more complicated. A lot more of stuff can go wrong with those, And I always have this sort of internal debate over, do I really want, let's say, 10 minutes of emergency breathing gas that I'm definitely going to get, or 40 minutes of gas that I don't entirely trust in? So that's a process a lot of us are going through, sort of finding faith in the new equipment. And so I suppose what I'm trying to say is a lot of it is born out of that trust, is just born out of very small changes, incremental changes over the years, and not messing with what works too much, But yeah, 100%. We also work a lot on redundancy. So a lot of our systems, the hot water system, the gas systems, all have multiple backups. To make sure that if one fails, the next fails, the next one kicks in, and if that all fails, you turn on the gas on your back, sort of thing. So you have trust in that. You have trust in the quality of the maintenance that you see around you. But absolutely, I've worked in places, west coast of Africa, and actually over in the States, quite a bit in the Gulf of Mexico, places like that, where there can be slightly lower standards, I suppose. And that's very difficult. That really is a case of you are wandering into slightly different territory there, where you do feel perhaps that you are putting yourself at risk. And I would say that when I was younger, that didn't bother me as much. But now with getting older, hopefully a little bit wiser, the responsibilities of family and things like that, and just more of a sense of I probably want to stay alive now. Makes me much more wary, and I would walk away from a lot of those jobs now. Quite frankly, I just wouldn't do them. You also have the you learn the backbone, don't you, to be able to stand up and say, well, I don't think that's acceptable, and sack me if you need to, and I'm not going to do that, or I need that changed. So that comes with experience and growth, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the reason why I mention it, Chris, is because you have to have faith in your equipment, and I know what that's like in the military. Having faith in your team, having faith in your equipment, it allows you to focus 100% on the job, right? You sort of go along with the process, you trust the process also. But take me back to that day in September. You're down on the seabed fixing the rig, the oil rig, and all of a sudden you hear an alarm, don't you? What's the first thought process that goes through your mind?
Well, strangely that day, we were talking about faith in equipment. I think because you do have this massive faith in the equipment, when the alarms went off that day, I didn't really think very much of it. We hear alarms a lot. We have a sort of open line of communication in our helmets up to a dive supervisor up on the ship, and you can hear everything he's saying, everything that's going on in the background, which is normally people slagging divers off, But the one thing you do hear every day are alarms in the background. They're testing alarms. We have alarms for the oxygen levels, carbon dioxide levels. So it's not unusual to hear them. They're not necessarily panic inducing. So I don't remember being instantly frightened or panicked at that point.
When did you think, when was the moment that you thought, shit, something is wrong and something is wrong with myself?
It was very much when, so our dive supervisor, who's a Canadian, said to me, not in any panicked way, but he said, boys, you need to get yourself, we're working inside a structure. Something about the size of a house, if you like, and we were quite well into it. And he was saying, you need to get yourselves out of there and back up on the top and back to the bell. And it was just something in, I think, in the tone of his voice. Didn't have to be any implicit that he said, but you could sense straight away, hang on a second, this is not a drill. There's clearly something wrong. Didn't know what it was, but you knew it was serious.
Not a drill.
But even then, We weren't particularly panicked. Stuff does go wrong. We do have to go back to the diving bell because things do break, and but we know we have this faith in the redundancy, the fact that there are backups, and so we sort of put our tools down fairly calmly and made our way out of the structure. And I think sort of I was fully expecting when I came out to see the diving bell up ahead of me. It's pretty well lit up, and the visibility was actually quite good that day, and it wasn't there, which was confusing more than anything. And it's sort of, essentially they had suffered this enormous catastrophic failure of the positioning system of the vessel, which holds the boat in one place, which is absolutely essential when you're attached to it by an umbilical. And that's a system, talking of redundancy, that has multiple backups, and it's never supposed to be impossible for it to have a single point failure. So that in itself was the biggest lesson we learned that day, was that you can trust in stuff all you like, and you can think you have redundancies, but they can still all go catastrophically wrong and fail, which it did. So the boat was basically drifting away.
So what happened? The boat drifted away. You went out to look for the bell. The bell wasn't there. What happened did the umbilical cord snap? What happened? Why wasn't the bell there? Is it because you were so far away from the vessel?
So our umbilicals are 50 metres long, or they were that day 50 metres. So we can only be 50 metres away from the diving bell. And basically, yeah, exactly that. The vessel had lost complete control. The bridge had blacked out. They normally have a whole load of thrusters and propellers which keep the boat in a single geographical position to allow us to work directly under it with cranes and whatever else. There was about a 35 knot wind that night, 4 or 5 metre seas. It was reasonably rough, and the 8,000 ton boat had suddenly become a sailboat. It was just drifting away from our position in an uncontrolled fashion. So, we're scrambling back to the bell. I'm climbing up my umbilical, and when I just get to the top of the structure, the vessel was obviously already at a point where it's nearly 50 meters away from me. So my umbilical is fully out, fully stretched, and it's caught on it was like a bucket, a metal outcrop on the top of the structure. And that, when you talk of the moment, that's the moment when I looked down, realised what was happening. It just happened so quickly. It just tightened around that. And that's the point at which I thought, you are in the shit here. No, there is, I've become an anchor to an 8,000 ton vessel, and there's obviously only going to be one winner in that. So that was very much the moment that I realised I was in trouble. But yeah, but basically then the vessel carried on moving away, ended up being nearly 250 metres away from us. And the umbilical, which carries all those, it is what it sounds like. It's a giver of life. That basically stretched as it went away and eventually snapped with like a shotgun went off. And I fell back to the seabed, with nothing to breathe. Yeah, which is a pain. Yeah.
So you're at the bottom of the seabed, umbilical cord snapped. Do you go straight onto your reserve, onto what we just spoke about? What do you do? How do you get out of that situation? What did you do?
Yeah, so we carry this emergency supply. If you've seen the film, they make a big deal of 5 minutes. But the truth is, if you do the maths, I probably had about 9 minutes of gas left on my back. We'll never really know how long that lasted, actually. But yeah, I mean, that definitely puts you in a totally different world. A world where you've essentially got an infinite supply of gas coming from the vessel. You could be down there months and you wouldn't run out. To one where you've basically got 9 minutes to get back into a breathable environment. So, that's definitely panic inducing. I won't lie. I was very frightened at that point. It's instinct, I think, kicks into a great degree. I didn't have a great number of choices. It was really, in that environment, going to the surface, for example, you maybe would take the risk as a scuba diver, just isn't an option. You would die instantly from sort of explosive decompression. So there really is only one safe haven, and that is the diving bell. So you focus entirely on, without really too much thinking, on getting back to that. So it was completely pitch black, dark. I had no sense of orientation. I'd fallen on my back down to the seabed, and this structure was about 10 meters high. So I think just upwards seemed the logical thing to do. So almost like going for a piss in the middle of the night, I sort of put my hands out in front of me and took a leap of faith and headed off in a particular direction. And I was very fortunate, really, more than anything, to bump into that structure. And I was eventually able to climb up to the top. And for me, that the seminal moment of the whole thing really was getting to the top. And for some reason, I fully expected to see the diving bell somewhere. I fully expected to see Dave or Duncan on their way back to come and help me, and to look up and see an entirely black, pitch black sea above me, not a speck of light. not a sound either. You could normally hear the boat on some level down there, the thrusters working. To be in that complete darkness and silence. That's when it transitioned from me to being a very dangerous situation into one which I pretty quickly worked out was not going to be survivable. I remember thinking it's probably taken me 3 or 4 minutes to get up here. Even if Dave had been right in front of me, ready to drag me back up to the diving bell and get my hat off, that the margins would have been pretty slim between that and my running out of gas. But with nobody there at all, it dawned on me pretty quick. So the truth is I didn't do much really. I didn't really have many choices. I remember just trying to put myself in a position where I would be easy to be found. And working out that my options were pretty limited really. It was just, I was very much dependent on the others. There was nothing really I could do. Just regulate my breathing. I tried very hard to calm myself down. And weirdly, I would say the point where I realized it was almost impossible to save myself, almost subliminally, I think, my body regulated itself. I calmed down naturally, I think, because I realized there wasn't anything I could do to help myself. That sort of fight or flight mode drained from me. And, I remember feeling pretty, almost like it was like grief stricken, almost, really, more than anything.
Did you feel euphoric, Chris? Because I've been in a situation where when you deal with life and death, you take one step to the left, you're not going to make it. You take one step to the right, and you're still going to be there. Because you said, you're completely reliant, then, either you're going to live or you're going to die. Do you think that feeling was euphoria? Do you think that you had a moment where you were just like, right, I've accepted my fate, there's nothing more I can do? And it's complete acceptance. I'm either going to live or I'm going to die.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I wouldn't go so far as it was euphoric. I suspect, that probably came to you, as you said, through that sort of being in that situation quite so often. I don't remember being frightened or panicked, that's for sure. It was very much a case of, as you're right, this is simple. In fact, it wasn't even, I was basically certain that this was it. And that was actually surprisingly easy to deal with. I remember just really being far more upset, and I'm not saying this to try and sound like holier than thou or anything, but I remember generally just being worried about people at home. I remember thinking about people at home being told about this, and the damage it was going to do to those I'm lucky enough to have love me at home. Your parents being told and stuff like that. But in terms of my own sort of sense of fear or panic, that definitely had gone. And I'm not particularly the brave type in any way really. It's just almost like that was a natural thing to happen really. The simplicity of not having the choice, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, and it's also it's so uncomplicated, right? Life is at its purest form, because ultimately that is your body going into a state of extreme peace. It's being at peace with itself. It's like, if it happens, it happens. There's not much I can do about it now. So what did happen thereafter? So you've obviously calmed yourself down. You've got a few minutes left of air. What happens thereafter? You try and put yourself in the best position possible. Then teamwork kicks in, right?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, guess after that happened, I had this sort of slightly strange, I never really like to harp on about it because, frankly, I'm sat here fine, and as you well know, there's people who don't come out of situations in the military, or people every day get sort of cancer diagnoses and, given death sentences. But it felt like that at the time. It felt like I was waiting on a death sentence, and I had a few minutes to, reflect on my certainly felt like my impending death. So they were sort of strange, not dark moments, but reflective moments, I guess. But eventually I pass into unconsciousness. I feel like I've got a very lucid memory of the whole thing really, but those last couple of moments, I always describe it as going to sleep. You sort of remember going to bed last night and being very excited to talk to me this morning, and but ultimately that minute when you go into unconsciousness, you don't really remember. So it was very much like that, and I often say that, if that's the way that I do go in the end, then that was fine by me. It wasn't a particularly unpleasant experience, but very much at that point I'm in other people's hands, entirely down to the team. I've run out of gas at that point, so I have nothing to breathe. And and the boat was still about 250 meters away, and they were really struggling to control it manually and try and bring it back to my position. And ultimately they were, through no fault of their own, they were failing to do that. It was just not designed to do that. And then eventually they employed a solution which we're all familiar with, which is that they basically turned the computer off and they turned it back on again, and that fired it all up. And they were able to regain.
No, Chris, wait, go back to that, please. Wait, so they'd done the old school, turn off the computer, turn it off, and that ultimately saved your life. Please tell me that's not the case.
That is exactly the case. On our boat, they're mostly Norwegians, the crew. They call that the Swedish solution, when it's like the ultimate insult, when you turn someone off and on again, and I think the Swedes call it the Norwegian solution. But yeah, really, that what it was. And I mean, I often get asked, joking aside, why didn't they do that earlier? Because by the time they've got back to me, 40 minutes have passed between my running out of gas and them coming back to me, So people will often say, well, why didn't they try that earlier? But, they didn't want to employ that situation because they had some level of control of the boat, and they worried if they turned it off and tried to reboot it, it wouldn't reboot and they would have nothing. But, they got to the point they realised they weren't going to get back to me. So that's exactly what they did. They turned the computer on and off again,
So how did you survive, Chris? So there's 40 minutes. You've run out of air. Yeah. What happens thereafter?
That's a good question. I'm kind of hoping you'd tell me, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know. It's
I've seen the film, but listen, I want to hear it from the horse's mouth.
I mean, it's I don't really like the word miracle. I'm not into that kind of thing at all. But it does feel slightly miraculous. I mean, there's literally once 40 minutes have passed, they've managed to regain control of the boat, and my colleague Dave, came down and hauled me back to the diving bell, which was no small feat in itself. Fed me in, and then Duncan, who was in the bell, was able to take my helmet off, and apparently literally just gave me 2 rescue breaths, and I regained consciousness, So yeah, there's this big gap in time, 35, 40 minutes where, seemingly I have nothing to breathe. But I'd always assumed to start with that it was the cold, You do hear stories of kids falling through ice in places like Norway, don't you? And surviving for very long periods of time as the body sort of goes into stasis. And they do that in hospitals as well. They cool open heart surgery patients down, their blood right down to almost put them into stasis. I definitely think that was a factor. But I've been told since, I've been lucky. I've been to speak at the British Medical Society and hyperbaric conferences around the world to try and get answers, I guess. But they sort of say that if your body goes down,
Chris, it is a miracle. It's a miracle that you're still alive.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah.
It is, mate. I don't care what you say. It's a miracle that you are still alive.
No, I know.
Wow.
I know. I think mostly it's the gas we're breathing. So the gas we breathe helium. So that night it was 6% oxygen in my gas, which obviously would be very harmful to us here on the surface. But at that kind of pressure, that actually means you're breathing a higher percentage of oxygen. So I think that flooded my tissues, whatever, really. I mean, that's the theory, but ultimately, very, very, wherever I go, people are still baffled by it. And not just baffled that I survived, but baffled that I survived, or at least, no one's really brave enough to tell me otherwise without any kind of brain damage or anything like that. So, yeah, it does beg a belief. Yeah, the margins would have been very, very small, that's for sure.
The teamwork behind that, there's so many working cogs, in the military, we're exactly the same. You take a little cog out, it affects the big cog on what the mission or the objective is. How important is teamwork, and how much trust do you now have in your fellow colleagues?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, enormous trust. People change in and out, and but yeah, that's the most secure place you are when you're with a team around you that you know and you trust. Absolutely. But yeah, the point you made right at the end there is, for me, is a very pertinent one, really, which I suspect you had similar experiences, really, that, the weird thing about the incident was that despite the fact we had this sort of single point catastrophic failure, to me, it felt, from our point of view as a team and as a diving section, if you like a success story, really, because they effected a rescue against seemingly impossible odds. So yeah, you would maybe think that it would, something like that happening would put you off doing it again, but it was very much the reverse for me. It was a case of, it gave me greater faith in the processes we have and the team that I have, or we have around us. You definitely had days down there in the diving bell where you're thinking, if I got in this situation or that situation, would we really get out of it, and that sort of was an education really, in that, with the right people around you and making really big decisions under massive pressure in a very stressful and unknown situations. They made almost universally the right calls and did the right things and trusted the processes that we have, the emergency response procedures that we have, and all of that sort of came together to get me out of a pretty sticky situation, obviously. So it's huge. Teamwork's everything, and exactly as you described in what we do as well. Every cog is absolutely essential, and I would say I have more faith in that now than I ever have done. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a great perspective and a great mindset to adapt. How long was your recovery, and how long did it take you to get back into the water? And the reason why I say that is because you said it's only enhanced your trust and in the job and your faith in the process. So what was the recovery like? And I hear, and from what I've seen, a couple of weeks later, you were straight back into it.
Yeah, we got shut down by the health and safety executive in the UK. So they wanted to find out, obviously, what happened and make sure that it could never happen again. So we had about 3-week period where the boat didn't work. Yeah, once that was sort of sorted out, we were given a choice. Really, they said to us at work, probably, if you're slightly cynical about it, get me back in the water makes me less likely to sue them as well. But that we won't go into that. And but the fact that they gave us a choice, and so. Yeah, but in truth, I never really thought twice about it. I mean, I was in the sort of fairly early stages of my career then, as a saturation diver at least, and I was worried about losing my job. I've still got a mortgage to pay and so on. And I think I was maybe a little bit naive to the gravity of what had happened. You touched on it earlier on, really. I think you contextualise these things a bit in that, we do all come close to dying all the time, don't we? Like you said, you step left, you go one way; you step right, you go another, and that's true when you're crossing the road, isn't it? And sometimes it's just context. What mine really is just a lucky escape, but in a slightly unusual environment. So for me, that's what it felt like. It didn't really feel like a big deal. I wonder if I'd make the same decision now. I don't know. Maybe I'm not so sure. But yeah, at the time, it just felt like, let's just get back on the bike and get on with it, really. And in some ways also, I think because I was unconscious through a lot of it, you look back on it as a third party as much as anyone else. So actually, it was absolutely fine. 3 weeks later, we were pretty much the first team back in the water in the same place. And there was a lot of piss taking, obviously, and we sort of laughed our way through it as you tend to do in those kind of situations. But ultimately, once we were back in the water and concentrating on what we were doing again, it was forgotten. And I think, as I said, touched on before, I think in a weird way, I felt more confident, strangely, about what I was doing than I had done before. Yeah.
Well, Chris, you're a very modest and humble man, and the epitome of getting back on the bike, right? Of using that experience as a life lesson rather than trauma, and getting straight back into it, which requires an extremely resilient and robust mindset, and hence the name of the podcast, Head Game. You certainly have a strong head game, mate. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And hopefully, mate, we can go diving one day. But listen, I'm going to take you out of your comfort zone and take you scuba diving. How about that?
That would be an absolute pleasure. I'd very much like that. Thank you. It is out of my comfort zone. You're right. Yeah. So I would be. I'd be the new boy there. But yeah, thank you very much for having me, Ant. It's it's always really lovely to talk to nice people, isn't it? So that's been a real pleasure, and I'm an honour to come on your podcast. I wish you every luck with it, and thanks for having me.
Chris Lemons is a saturation diver, and his story has since been turned into a documentary on Netflix called Last Breath. Thank you so much for joining me on Head Game. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of our incredible stories, and leave me a review wherever you're listening. I'm Ant Middleton. Catch you again